Just like 1 year ago, the NFL draft order is set with Kansas City picking dead last and the Chicago Bears picking number 1 overall. Last year, when the Bears are in a position to either draft a quarterback number 1 overall or keep Justin Fields, they decided to do a trade with Carolina that added an elite wide receiver and in the process gave them back the number 1 overall pick despite a 7-10 season. Now, the question embroiled in the entire sports media is whether or not the Chicago Bears will keep Justin Fields or draft Caleb Williams. And this conversation I've seen throughout the sports media is kind of inaccurate. I don't really agree with that at all. I do not think the Chicago Bears should draft Caleb Williams. I think that after looking at the recent history of number 1 overall quarterbacks, looking at the media evaluation process and how that has been incredibly flawed recently, and the fact that the context of the situations around Justin Fields is not being taken into account, and the track record of Lincoln Riley quarterbacks all lead to the exact same conclusion that the Chicago Bears should keep Justin Fields. I'm going to explain all of that in this video of State of the North. Make sure you like the video. Subscribe if you are new, because I'm a little bit of a newcomer here. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. First and foremost, let's talk about Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is an electric USC quarterback who has won a Heisman and has turned a program around. And from the NFL scouts, it's pretty clear. He's got a rocket arm, wheels, and a play style akin to Patrick Mahomes. He's been labeled as a generational prospect, a number 1 overall pick for sure this year, and maybe a number 1 overall pick of number 1 overall picks, and a true generational talent at the position. But the coverage over Caleb Williams has been almost arguably sycophantic. And it's all to push the notion that the Chicago Bears, in order to win a Super Bowl, need to draft a quarterback. That's at least what the media would have you believe. But if you actually take a look at the list of number 1 overall picks who were quarterbacks, you'll find that there's a really, really interesting thing. Tim Couch, Michael Vick, David Carr, Carson Palmer, Eli Manning, Alex Smith, Jamarcus Russell, Sam Bradford, Cam Newton, Andrew Luck, Jameis Winston, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, and Bryce Young. When you take a look at this list, none of these guys won a Super Bowl as the starting quarterback of the team that originally drafted them. Of the ones on this list that won a Super Bowl as starting quarterbacks, you have Eli Manning and Matthew Stafford. Eli Manning was traded away after he was drafted to the Giants. It was a really strange situation. And Matthew Stafford was traded very, very late in his career to the LA Rams. If you want to go back to a quarterback who actually did the feat, went number 1 overall, and won a Super Bowl with that team, you have to go all the way back to Peyton Manning in 1998. All of that is to say that a quarterback coming in number 1 overall and winning a Super Bowl is very, very rare. And let's talk about the other label that's thrown on Caleb Williams, because when you talk about the can't miss prospects, a lot of it is because they are a quote-unquote generational prospect. Recently, this label has been put on 2 quarterbacks, Andrew Luck and Trevor Lawrence. And for both of these guys, the thought process was very much the same. These guys are going to have a lot of tangibles and intangibles that when combined mean that no matter where they go, no matter what team, they will turn them into contenders, and they could redefine the league in some ways. And while that was definitely the case with Andrew Luck, and if he didn't retire so early, he'd probably have a even more phenomenal career, that label has not been exactly the case for Trevor Lawrence. He went to Jacksonville, and he's been disappointing. Is that because of the Jags ruining him? Probably. But, I mean, this year they started 8-3, finished 9-8. I'm bringing this up just to say that even if you're crowned a generational prospect does not mean you're necessarily going to be successful like in the postseason or even in the regular season overall. And the media actually picked the wrong generational prospects, quote unquote. If you want to go outside of this year, the guy who would actually fit this description more would have been the guy drafted number 1 overall 1 year before, and that'd be Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow went to Cincinnati despite the fact that A, people thought that he should refuse to play, B, complained about his hand size, or C, even thought he shouldn't be drafted number over at all. He, despite setting playoff sack records every game, dragged the Bengals to a Super Bowl and then an AFC Championship in back-to-back years when he was healthy. And he's the only guy outside of Tom Brady to defeat Patrick Mahomes in a Super Bowl. And yet, he did not get the generational prospect label because evaluating quarterback is hard. It's a really hard thing to do because it's not just about what you physically can do or what you did in high school. It's about, your grit, your ability to process things quickly during a game. There's a whole lot of complicated stuff with evaluating quarterbacks. But the media has had a particularly egregious track record recently. I already mentioned how a lot of these guys didn't even think Joe Burrow should be the number 1 overall draft pick. But they botched it this last year with C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young. If you were to tune into any cable show, they would tell you, oh, Bryce Young's absolutely going to be the number 1 overall pick. He should be the number 1 overall pick. He's consensus number 1 overall pick. He's the best quarterback in the draft by far. He's the best quarterback in the draft by far. And let's all ignore the fact that he is a midget among men. Let's ignore the fact that, the owner had to get involved in order to overrule the coach and the GM in order to get this quarterback. Let's focus on those cognitive tests. Those are really important. And in the process, because the media fixated on propping up their favorite, they missed out on a guy who smashed records, won the division his first year, and demolished an awesome defense in the playoffs. If Trevor Lawrence did the same thing C.J. Stroud did, the generational prospect label would again fit. C.J. Stroud's another. You can argue that he is the true he's what Trevor Lawrence was supposed to be, and the media got it horrifically wrong. And yet we are supposed to once again take them seriously because they bring on the quote-unquote experts. First and foremost, when it comes to these quote-unquote experts, what they do is that they bring on former NFL GMs, former NFL coaches, former this, former that. The key word there being former. There's a nasty habit in politics and sports for you to fail upward. You get a job, you stink at your job, then you go get millions of dollars to be on the TV talking about the job that you originally sucked at. That's how this stuff operates. NBC Chicago, in a segment with talking about Caleb Williams, brought on a guy that said, oh yeah, you should definitely draft Caleb Williams, even though this idiot should not have been taken seriously because he's the guy that greenlit the decision to draft Mitchell Trubisky instead of Deshaun Watson or Patrick bleepin' Mahomes. But there is no accountability if you're wrong in the media. You just get to keep talking, and we're all expected to take you seriously. This wouldn't even be the first time that a Lincoln Riley quarterback has been overvalued by the media. Before Lincoln Riley was the coach at USC, he was the coach of Oklahoma, and he oversaw the rise of 2 phenomenal college players, Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. Both of these guys had phenomenal college careers under him, won a Heisman, and were drafted number 1 overall, just like Caleb Williams has and is expected to be. But Lincoln Riley quarterbacks have been some of the most underwhelming and volatile personalities in the game. Baker Mayfield has been calling out his medical staff repeatedly. He's been very, very unstable presence when he was in Cleveland, and Kyler Murray had that whole video game contract situation. And both of these guys have been disappointing. Baker Mayfield, yeah, he won a playoff game, but he also had a lot of disappointing games and underachieved, even with a stacked roster. Kyler Murray had one good year where they started off like 11-1, they and then just completely fell apart and then got destroyed in the playoff game. The Lincoln Riley special has been to take these elite college quarterbacks and send them as mid-temperamental guys. Kyler Murray isn't exactly the best quarterback in the league. We all know that. And Baker Mayfield wasn't even the best quarterback of his draft class. That was Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And there has been some stuff to question with Caleb Williams. There are a lot of people focusing on whether or not painting your fingernails in general is a good thing. But what's more important is that he was painting like the F word on his fingers, which is not exactly great. There's a whole thing about him crying in his mom's arms. That's bogus. No one should care about that. But what you should care about is that Caleb Williams has been acting like a little bit of a diva, picking and choosing which stuff he's going to do at the Combine, delaying already scheduled meetings with the Bears. And there's a whole drama with Caleb Williams' camp, leaking to Colin Cowherd that maybe he doesn't want to go. And then backtracking, like, oh, hey, I actually would be okay with Chicago, but it would be very, very hard. And then there's also his father asking if there could be minority ownership for whatever team drafts Caleb Williams. This stuff doesn't mean that Caleb Williams will not be a successful quarterback, but the Lincoln Riley quarterbacks have had a track record of being a little bit eccentric, so to speak, it's just further confirmation that maybe we should take a little bit of a step back, just a tad, maybe. But all of this would be for naught if you thought Justin Fields was a great quarterback. But the media has done a great job of drilling the 10-28 quarterback win statistics into everyone's head, which is incredibly dishonest, mainly because that was buoyed in large part by a 3-14 season. But even if you want to throw that out real quick, Justin Herbert and Matthew Stafford, they both have losing records overall, and we consider them good quarterbacks. CJ Stroud in 1 year has more playoff wins than Justin Herbert, and yet people still consider Justin Herbert elite. San Francisco quarterbacks have had great win-loss records, and yet they are undervalued because, oh yeah, it's about the stuff around you. Context matters. Context matters, and Justin Fields is not being given the benefit of the doubt on that. As I said, a large chunk of that 10-28 number was because of a 3-14 season. Once they let Justin Fields run, the offense clicked 2 years ago. We all know that. But what doesn't get talked about enough was that the moment the Bears traded away Roquan Smith, the defense immediately regressed and was awful despite the fact that they have a defensive head coach. Look at the scores of some of these games. The Cowboys beating the Bears 49-29, a 35-32 loss in Miami, 31-30 to the Lions, 27-24, 31-10 to the New York Jets. The New York Jets offense stinks, fellas. It stinks. This was a game, by the way, that Justin Fields did not play in. The truth is that Justin Fields was the only good thing keeping this team kind of competitive that year. But that context got ignored. And this year, you saw the exact same problem. That defense stunk. 38 points to the Packers week 1, 27 to Tampa, 41 to Kansas City, 31 to the Denver Broncos. 137 points total. Now, some of you will be saying, hey, not all of those were defensive points, in which case 137 is a very, very wide, that's a very wide sample. All right, even if you assume they're, like, you're throwing, I don't know, pick six. 130 points? It's still insane. And this defense made Russell Wilson look like a Pro Bowler who has now been cut by the Denver Broncos. And this is a game where they wasted Justin Fields playing perfectly up until a Hail Mary attempt at the end of the first half. There's also been some bizarre stuff with Luke Getsy. He's been an up-and-down offensive coordinator who loves to play spam, including part of the reason he threw that pick six in Tampa Bay. They ran the exact same play and formation 3 times earlier. Right before, and then we blame Justin Fields. But once the Bears added Roquan Smith, and Justin Fields didn't have to score 40 to stand a chance, the team started picking up and winning some really impressive games, like the Lions, 28-13 win. That's great. That's a team that went to the NFC Championship. The Cardinals, they had just come off of a win against the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Falcons were competing for a playoff spot at the time. And yeah, I know it was a little bit of disappointing end to the year with a loss to Green Bay, but that Green Bay team is the same one that throttled the 2 seed and gave the San Francisco 49ers, the NFC champion, absolute fits. The truth is that the Chicago Bears are a lot closer than people think. Which is why some people would also still say, it's like, hey, you could draft Caleb Williams and get even closer. Caleb Williams has definitely some upside. I will say, when it comes to comparing anyone to Patrick Mahomes, don't do that, because Patrick Mahomes is one of one and this is where people got into trouble with calling Zach Wilson the Mormon Mahomes because of a combine throw. But Caleb Williams does have some downside. He tends to not take the layups. He can be a little bit fidgety in the pocket, and so he's fumble prone a little bit when extending plays. I actually don't think this is as big of a deal as people think, and I think he's going to be a good quarterback. You know why? Because that was the same profile for Justin Fields. He was a rocket arm and a wheel, and has wheels. Just like Caleb Williams immediately went to USC and turned the program around, Justin Fields went to Ohio State, and they immediately found themselves in the college football playoffs. And just like Caleb, he struggled with taking the layups, being a traditional pocket passer, and could be a little bit fumble prone while extending the plays. So this debate is not even whether or not you get rid of Justin Fields for this completely different quarterback. You're basically asking, do you want to get a new Justin Fields to try to mold? And on that front, the one metric that people are throwing in the face is, financially, you got to reset the clock. The NFL just increased the salary cap by $30 million. That is not an excuse. And Justin Fields has shown growth as a passer in that back half of the year when they were winning these games. And if you watch that Green Bay Packer game and you honestly thought that Justin Fields was the problem, I don't know what game you were watching. That was just a top-to-bottom better team than the Chicago Bears. And then here's another thing to consider. If you were to make this decision to get rid of Justin Fields, you better be careful. Because the people in the locker room, the fans, they're all on the same page. They want to keep Justin Fields. They don't want him to go anywhere. Anywhere at all. And that is something. They finished 7-10 this year. There are some incentives to say, maybe we don't want this guy. But that's because they're seeing the same things that I'm seeing. There is growth, and there's something to be said about the way Justin Fields has conducted himself, that the team still has his back. If the Chicago Bears want to get out of the dumpster fire, they need to understand that in the NFL, this season has been all about rewarding patience. Kansas City had a lot of wide receiver problems earlier in the season, a lot of drops. But guess what? They were patient. And because they were patient, they won a Super Bowl. The Green Bay Packers had to replace a legend Aaron Rodgers, and there was a really rocky start for Jordan Love. A 3-6 start. But the Packers were patient. And they ended up getting into the playoffs and then being the first 7 seed to ever win a playoff game. And the Lions, another team in the Bears division, well, they were patient too. After trading away Matthew Stafford and grabbing Jared Goff and having a rough year, there were a lot of questions about whether or not they were going to go draft a quarterback. But they stayed the course. They added talent around him. And even when they were 9-8, they just kept adding talent. Until they found themselves finally as division champions and winners of multiple playoff games. Patient teams in the NFL have been rewarded. It hasn't even been close. I mean, just think about the teams that did the worst this year, or at least had some of the most disappointing ends. Carolina, they were not patient. They traded up with Chicago, and in the process, they completely ruined their own future, where they've got a lot of questions now too. And Cleveland, in an effort to stay competitive, decided to go all in on Deshaun Watson, and that has blown up in their face too. So, team to team, Ravens and Pittsburgh, they were patient. And Lamar's flourished into an MVP, and Pittsburgh keeps finding ways to barely make the playoffs. Patient teams, stable teams, are successful teams. And if the Bears want to do that, and want to be one of those teams, they should keep Justin Fields. Especially when you have a new offensive coordinator that should be able to actually help out Justin Fields. One thing we saw this year is that coordinators matter. And getting rid of Luke Getsy is a net positive, in my opinion, for the Chicago Bears. If the Bears are smart, they're going to go draft Marvin Harrison Jr. Because I can tell you, as someone who's watched a lot of Ohio State football, this guy's a game wrecker. This guy is even when, like, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith-Njigba. I've seen a lot of Ohio State wide receivers tear it up. I've never seen anyone quite like Marvin Harrison. And the truth here is that in that Georgia game, Marvin Harrison Jr. got hit in the head and had a concussion. And the moment that happened was when the game turned for Georgia. Because Marvin Harrison is one of one. A phenomenal player. And if you do this, you will give Justin Fields a great wide receiver tandem. Just like when Joe Burrow had T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, went to the Super Bowl. Jalen Hurts had A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, went to the Super Bowl. And Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce, he won a Super Bowl. I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to happen with Justin Fields, but I really do think that adding another wide receiver is a good thing. So here's how I really think that the draft should go and probably will go. The Chicago Bears will end up staying at number 1. Not because they don't want to move down or wouldn't be open to it potentially, but because the one team that I think they would be willing to do business with, Washington, I don't think they're going to do it. Because we just saw the Carolina Panthers get fleeced. Basically, the Chicago Bears gave the number 1 overall pick to Carolina to add DJ Moore, get a couple more picks, and then got a number 1 overall pick right back. They basically got DJ Moore and all that draft capital for free. So no one is going to do a deal with Ryan Poles this offseason. I'm convinced of that. So I think the Bears are going to stay at number 1. They're going to stay at number 1 and draft Marvin Harrison Jr. And then Caleb Williams will end up right where he always wanted to be, with Cliff Kingsbury in his hometown with Washington. I really think that that's the most likely scenario. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments. You think I'm right? Make sure you guys like the video and subscribe if you are new. Thank you guys for watching State of the North.